All right. So participant list is filling up. That's great. I think we can get started. So welcome, hi everyone, to next episode or to a new episode of the ArangoDB Community Pioneer Project. So for those who are not already familiar with ArangoDB, you can easily get started. Just check out ArangoDB Oasis, which is our cloud service. You have a 14-day trial there, and have the full-featured ArangoDB Enterprise Edition, so you can play for free for 14 days. We have a training center. You can check out the manual, and of course, if you want to contribute or follow our development, you are very welcome on our GitHub repository. So quickly about the Community Pioneer Project. So we want to provide a platform for all the people in our community who want to showcase what they've built, questions they could solve, hard data modeling problems they solved, or whatever. It can be a blog post. You can contribute a tutorial how to work with a certain feature, or of course, you're very welcome to join one of our online meetups that we have on a regular basis, and showcase your startup, showcase your product, showcase any other topic that you could solve or want to solve with ArangoDB. And I'm very happy for today's talk. Today we have Julian Grossman and David from reKnowledge on our online meetup. And I'm very happy because I think the use case and problem that the reKnowledge team is working on is pretty interesting. And Julian, you have a very long history in the intelligence community. Maybe we start a bit with your background and what fascinates you about intelligence and data analytics.
Sure, no problem. I would just mention one thing. On the slide, it says I'm a PhD. I only did a master. I didn't have the courage to do for the whole 4 years, so I'm not a doctor.
Oh, then this was my mistake. I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. Thank you for the promotion. So, yeah.
Always happy to.
So indeed, I've been fascinating in the intelligence and more broadly about politics and understanding violent conflict from a very early age. And when I was at uni, I extensively studied the new form of warfare, especially terrorism and insurgency, which are increasingly becoming the norm in terms of violent conflict. And this is when I realized that to win those kind of war, you don't need air supremacy or kinetic supremacy anymore, but you need information supremacy. And so during my master in intelligence and international security at King's, I focused a lot of my studies on the issues of information management, because despite all the cool and most advanced technologies the intelligence services use to gather information, so think of spies, satellite, and these sort of things, the intelligence community at large is really struggling to efficiently manage, leverage, and communicate all the information and knowledge they're gathering. So typically, you can think of the NSA that has humongous amount of information, but they can't leverage a fraction of it because they just don't have the right information management system. And then I went to work for one of the leading private intelligence company. And this is where I got face to face with this problem in practice. And in particular, I was in charge of developing all sorts of data-driven solutions to help the analysts produce better intelligence. And this became quickly a nightmare when you have data that are all over the place and in different formats. So I spend most of my day-to-day work cleaning up, organizing, and only at the very end doing some cool analytics. So yeah, this is how I got involved with this world.
All right. So if I understand it correctly, you have a very long scientific as well as professional career in the intelligence field. How do you see the role of data change over the past years and maybe even longer? So what data gets used today, how it gets used, and maybe how this role, how the overall role changed.
Well, this is a very, very, very good question, and is a critical one for the intelligence tradecraft, because like in many other aspects of life and businesses, data is becoming critical. And it's critical for many, many different reasons. To start with, increasingly, the end consumer of intelligence report demand data-driven analytics and visualization in place of the traditional written report. Clients of intelligence reports simply don't have the time, decision makers don't have the time to read through long reports. They want just the actionable information being pushed to them immediately through visual interface, and then they can make decision very, very fast. But it's also, data also critical for the analysts to do their job efficiently, because they have so many issues and so many indicators to monitor that effectively they need the help of technology to get on top of this information overload. So typically when I was working for IHS, I created a dashboard to automate the monitoring of indicator of risk to maritime shipping off the Yemen coast. And using indicator outlined by one of our regional experts, I create all sorts of little algorithms that would monitor our feed of information, test each indicators, and then trigger them if they had occurred. And the end result was that we were able to forecast the increased risk a whole month before the first attack. So this was very much a success in terms of the approach and the methodology and the way we leverage data.
Okay.
To create this sort of case studies, it takes huge amount of work because you need to prepare the data, organize it, and so on. And again, it's going back to the lack of infrastructure that allows us to quickly create those solutions on the fly.
Oh, cool. Before I get to my last question, I will quickly make you the host so that people can also see you. And then we come to the last question. Just give me a second. So now that should work.
Yep, let me switch on the camera. Here we go. Yeah.
Ah, wonderful. Oh, we can see both. That's great. All right, then I would say I have one more question for you. So you talked about the role of data and your past experiences in this field. So some problem you must have found to start reKnowledge and work on that. Can you expand a bit more on the problem and then also show what you're actually doing and what you can do?
Oh, well, that's a perfect segue for the start of the presentation, because the key problem we start to address, well, obviously we want to improve data-driven analytics in the whole intelligence sphere, but before we can do that, we need to address the previous problem, which is how you get your data and how you organize it. Because, and you'll see in a minute, our job requires to capture information from all over the place, and this can rarely be automated. So this is why at the moment it's still very much a labor-intensive work. And the whole idea with reKnowledge is make this work more efficient, but ultimately to use all this work done by the human researchers so that we can start training artificial intelligence in detecting information in unstructured document, in identifying risk-relevant information in a news article. But to get there, you need a human to train the machine to detect those sorts of things, because it can't be done just by simple rule base or just by throwing loads of data to an unsupervised AI algorithm and hope he's going to figure out the next risk of terrorism. So fundamentally, this is what we're trying to, the problem we're trying to tackle with reKnowledge. And yeah, if you want, let me share my screen.
Yeah, let's just jump right in.
Exactly. Cool. So, as I said, at reKnowledge, hold on a second. Why is it not? Oh, okie dokie. Cool. So yeah, like I said, at reKnowledge, we develop software to improve complex investigation, like enhanced due diligence, police, and intelligence investigation. And this type of work is inherently labor intensive because it requires to gather a lot of discrete pieces of information from many different places. And worse still, researchers use very basic tools such as a web browser, Excel, Word, or Evernote to gather and consolidate their information and data. And because of this analog nature of their work, intelligence researchers mostly communicate their findings through text report rather than data-driven analytics and visualization. And another consequence of this archaic approach is that organizations struggle to build institutional memory or institutional knowledge that they can quickly leverage for their work. And so with reKnowledge Digital Investigative Board, what we do is we speed up data collection and consolidation, the collection and consolidation step. Then we enable organizations to build and constantly enhance the institutional knowledge and visualize and analyze it. And finally, we help our client communicate complex insight through data and data visualization. So in practice, our solution is made up of an ontological editor where the user can define the nodes he's interested in. He can define the schema both for the node and for the relationship, so they can fully customize their knowledge base. And then we also have, And then we also have developed a web browser add-on with which we can use to overlay our knowledge on any web page and interact with this knowledge. We can also add to it very, very quickly and efficiently. So here I'm adding a couple of nodes to my knowledge base with a few clicks. And then I can also create connection between those nodes directly on the web page. And the whole idea is the more we do this, obviously the system is recording where you found this information. And now this become a training data point for machine learning. And finally, we've developed an analytical workbench where the analysts can navigate the knowledge and communicate the insight through data visualization. So at reKnowledge, we are using the ArangoDB multimodal database underneath our solution. ArangoDB features, including its graph capabilities, multimodal NoSQL support, different deployment model, its Fox's microservices framework, and its enterprise-grade scalability, make ArangoDB the ideal technology to build reKnowledge's foundation. It allows us not only to iterate as quickly as possible, but to create a system that can evolve with our product and customer requirement, both commercial and technical, and to support our growth ultimately. So now that I've given you a bit of background about reKnowledge, let's turn to our case studies for today, which is the political and violent risk associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. So obviously this unprecedented health crisis has a lot of political and violent risk potential. It's also a great example of the challenges intelligence analysts face when doing their work. Namely, they deal with extremely complex questions and they have to face a constant information overload. So we start this research like any other intelligence research. Once we have identified the issues we want to focus on and the indicators to look for, we set out to gather the data and information needed. So to do that, we use our web browser add-on. We can overlay our knowledge on the web, on any web page. So this is a EU web page about some legislation. We're gonna add an international organization, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. We could add whatever attribute we found interesting. Here, in this case, I just leave it blank. And then I can also create a connection between this organization and the legislation in which we gave input. And here we can add whatever extra information we want. And all of those information box, all those properties can be customized for your own purpose. So obviously all those attributes can be changed.
Yeah, real quick, the audio quality is a bit bad. Is it maybe a plug not fully in, or?
No.
It's back to normal again, but a few seconds ago it was a bit hard to understand you.
Okay. And what about now? Can you hear me better?
No, it sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so then I went on and did what any analyst would do, spend a few hours, or in the case of COVID-19, a few days, gathering all sorts of information all over the place. Now, even though it's still very labor intensive, using the add-on made data collection and consolidation much faster than the traditional method. And on top of this, the add-on automatically record all the sources from where we extract our knowledge, thus providing our analysts with a full audit trail. And now that we've gathered all our information, how do we leverage all this knowledge for insight with reKnowledge? Well, let's start by looking at the mitigation measure put in place. So here, I'm in my analytical environment, and I'm going to start by mapping out all the mitigation measures I identified for this project. And here they are. So now I'm just cleaning up a little bit my canvas, spreading the various policies around, and then I will pin them to my workbench. And what I can do now is use my advanced search tool to look for connection between any countries or international organization and those various policies. And I can enhance this at separate time. So let's start by mid-February. And we can see we have only a few countries that have started implementing policies. We can also see that we have different type of connection. We have support and enacted. And here we can use our visualization customization to change the visualization for each type of connection.
Julien, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I think that the visualizations so the little movies are interfering with the sound quality. Is there any?
Oh, okay, this is interesting.
Sound quality is back to complete normal again, but once there is a lot going on the screen, the sound quality turns bad again.
Huh. Okie dokie. Right. So in this case, let me just move the slider like this. So here I'll just fast forward to April, and now we can start seeing more and more policies being implemented by more and more countries. And of course, if we start expanding the whole network, so here I also bring social distancing, because a lot of those connections, I didn't have any date for it because it's sometimes tricky to know exactly when a government implement those policies. But the whole point is, very quickly, I can start creating this sort of network where I can see the various clusters of countries based on the mix of policies they've applied. So obviously, we have a big clusters of countries that are implementing a mix of social distancing and mandatory lockdown. But we also have countries that have chosen different route or different approaches to the problem. So typically, quite a few Asian countries are using a mix of testing and big data analytics, tracking, and extensive use of personal protective equipment to tackle the crisis. So here is a good idea of understanding how different countries are applying those policies. And obviously, we will keep on tracking those measures, and we will update our knowledge base when this various policy are either extended or rescinded. Now, because our initial solution is geared toward researchers dealing mostly with unstructured data, we have not yet implemented the integration of reKnowledge with structured data set, such as the daily contamination rate or the death rate associated with the virus. But once we do that, our client will be in a unique position to merge their unstructured research with structured data and provide powerful insight about which set of policies were the most effective. And then in this in turn will serve to inform decision maker for the next time. The next issue we'll look at, so hold on because that's another video, is political instability. So here I'm pulling a few different political instability indicators, commercial war, instability for various countries, and so on. And now if we just focus on global instability, we can see some event and indicators associated with those. So typically, we have here, for instance, the decision by Trump to halt all the World Health Organization funding. And here you can see all the information we've captured for that particular information. So we have a summary, we have the sources, and we also have the analytical judgment I made for that particular decision. So now at the moment in reKnowledge, you can only customize node based on, or connection based on the classes and not the properties. But we can still customize manually each node if we want to make, to visualize a certain attribute. So here we'll just make the node very big and very red, just to signify that this is an important indicators. And I'll do the same with the peacekeeping indicator, because again, this is very, very critical. Now there's another indicator we've looked in the context of political instability is the food crisis, because even small change of prices in food product can have massive civil unrest and civil war potential. So for us, it's critical to monitor this sort of indicators. And here, if I just advance a little bit the video, we can see that we have both indicators of a potential food crisis and counter indicators. So on the indicator side, we have a few businesses and farmers reporting some logistic problems. And in terms of counter indicators, we have a report that at this stage, at least, we have the highest food stock for rice and wheat. So at least in the short term, the food crisis is not imminent. But of course, as the situation evolves, we will keep on tracking those indicators and see if we get more and more indicator of food problem or food supply. There is also the food protectionism indicator that is quite interesting because here we have quite a few countries that have suspended export of food for the foreseeable futures. And again, tracking those is quite important, especially tracking whether they will stop the blockade of export at the date they set, because again, that will give us an indication of whether food prices will rise in the near futures or whether we can expect supply chain issues in the near future. How's the audio so far? Is it getting better?
It's perfect now, yeah.
Excellent, cool. So the next issue we'll look at is the various theories that have cropped up. Oh wait, I need to pause this. Around COVID-19 and the political response to it. So here are only a few of the theories and conspiracy theories I've identified so far, and we can maybe start by looking at a theory that's assessed that government had underestimated the coronavirus crisis. And here very quickly we can see, okay, which organization or individual believe this theory to be true or to be false. So already we get a sense of, okay, what sort of perspective various stakeholders might have. But then we can also see that we have actual information that might suggest that some government might have underestimated the crisis. So typically, oops, right, I think I'm on the wrong slide. Yeah. So yeah, here typically we have information. Damn it, I have to stop with this video. Information about the national, wait, how is it called? The National Center for Medical Intelligence. So they published a report in November 2019, warning of potentially cataclysmic events. But that report, obviously, the US government has failed to act upon it decisively. Well, according to Trump, they acted just perfectly fine, but that's beside the point. So here is a way of quickly gathering information that, well, at this stage is still too early to decide whether government have underestimated or overestimated. That's something that's going to be decided by historian in a few years from now. But in the meantime, we can start gathering information that are either reinforcing this theory or on the opposite, that is undermining the theory. And then as an intelligence analyst, at the end of the day, we always have to make judgment on incomplete information. So the whole aim of the game is to try to gather as much information as possible, try to decide which information is the most likely to be important or not, and then make a judgment based on this. And here I've got another example where in France we have a few indicators that indeed the government might have underestimated it. So we have first the admission by the health minister that back in January she knew it was going to be a tsunami, and then failed to convince the government to act accordingly. We also have a group of doctors that is suing the prime ministers and the former health ministers for state lie. So we have a few information that is reinforcing this this scenario. But again, it's too early at this stage to decide for sure if government have underestimated or overestimated. Then I just wanted to finish on this one, on the case of Johan Geseke, because I think this is quite an interesting case. Here we have a professor of epistemology that is connected to the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. Is the leader of the centers, and is also a senior advisor to the World Health Organization. So let me just see if I can. Yeah. So he's an advisor to the Director General. And here, what is interesting is that this expert is actually running a counter-analysis compared to the mainstream narrative. He believes that the lockdown policies is not evidence-based, and that the herd immunity was probably the correct policy to pursue. Now, this insight is very interesting because, as I said, it runs counter from the mainstream narrative, and because it is made by someone with extensive expertise in the topic. And this shows that among the medical and scientific community, there is no agreement as to the best policies to push forward. And this, in turn, is another indicator we will have to monitor, because as the crisis evolves, there is a serious risk of politicization of scientific research. And that's usually not a good thing. And this is already something we have early indication of. So typically in France at the moment, there is a whole dispute around the chloroquine medicine. So we have one professor, Didier Raoult, which is a strong proponent of this medicine, and he's pushing it forward. And we can see a whole clusters of opposition politicians and opposition groups, such as the Yellow Vest, supporting this professor. And on the other hand, we have all the governmental advisors and medical experts that are opposed to Raoult method and protocol. And this is an early indication that all of a sudden, medical research is becomes manipulated for political purposes. So again, this is something we will keep on tracking as the crisis evolves. And then, okay, this is another video I need to be careful of. We can start looking at the various theories that COVID-19 was actually overestimated to push a specific agenda. So here I've got loads of different theories, but we'll just quickly go through a couple, starting with the anti-vaxxers. So all those are the people that believe vaccines are dangerous, and they've been pushing a conspiracy theory along the line that organization will use the COVID-19 crisis to push a whole vaccination agenda. So typically, those are the people that will oppose Bill Gates and this sort of organization. And we can clearly see a few of the individuals have identified as actively pushing this theory online. Yeah. Now, another interesting development is the coming in this crisis is the coming together of very different, usually opposed agenda. And this is something we have actually seen in Germany recently. So if we look at the anti-lockdown protests that have cropped up in Germany, so here I'm just gonna show you the quick steps I'm using to use my advanced query builder. So I'm looking for all the events that have event type being protest with two level of separation from Germany. And when I run my query, I get this list of a few anti-lockdown protests that have been taking place in a few cities. Now, the whole idea is that we can start expanding each of those events to see what sort of nodes are related to them. And once we've expanded everything, we can start seeing some interesting insight. And most notably, we can see that the protests in Berlin are driven by some leftist organization, especially an alternative media called Democratic Resistance. But those are also attended by far-right activists. So we have neo-Nazis, we have anti-Semite, we also have supporter of US far-right conspiracy theory like QAnon. And then we have some support from AFD members for the protest. Now, I'm not saying that in all Germany, those protests are politically motivated. For instance, in Stuttgart, when we start looking in detail at the events, we can see that the person that has led the event has no particular political affiliation, is just an IT entrepreneur that basically wants to go back to business. But we can also see that people with alternative agenda also joining up on those protests. So at this early stage, is still too early, but what's going to be interesting in the next few months is as those protests are likely to increase and increase, it will be interesting to see which of those various groups will start generating the most support or the most political benefit out of those organizations. So again, this is something that we'll be tracking in the next few months. Now, just before I move on to the next case, I just wanted to mention the QAnon case, because this was actually an interesting example of how institutional knowledge can be super useful for analysis. So, as I said, QAnon is a conspiracy theory that is widespread in alt-right circle in the US. And I was quite surprised to see this appearing in Germany. So I thought, okay, let's see if I've got any other indication of connection between this theory and Germany. So I used my advanced search filters. And then I came across this incident. So this is a shooting that took place in February in Hanau, where a far-right shooter killed multiple people in two attack on shisha bars. And now what was interesting is that when I start looking at it, I could see that actually this individual had mentioned the QAnon theory in his last video. So it shows that, well, first of all, that I've got a very short-term memory because this event took place in February and I should have remembered that details. But probably because I've got many things in my mind, this was an easy way for me to remember that actually we already knew something about this. And here I can add on my analysis and not have to restart from scratch. I can reuse research that I've done in a previous research, because obviously what I haven't said is that for already many years I've been following closely all those sorts of extremist groups, and I've been mapping a lot of information related to them. So effectively, this event wasn't captured within my coronavirus study. It was captured through another part of my research. So yeah, this is the great advantage of having a knowledge base that you can consolidate all your knowledge in one place. So the final conspiracy theory we'll look at quickly is one that is cropping up a lot in the UK, and is related to the 5G conspiracy. So if you're not aware, there are some people that believe there are relation between the coronavirus and 5G. Some people think, for instance, that the 5G is weakening your immunity and therefore make you more likely to catch coronavirus. Now, as usual with this sort of theory, it's very interesting to very quickly map out who are the people talking about this. And here, very quickly, we can identify individuals that are linked with anti-5G activism. So John Kuhl, for instance, is one of those social media leaders that makes a lot of noise on social media. We also have RT, which has an history of propagating all sorts of fake news, especially around 5G. And then we have some few celebrities also wading in the debate. But what's interesting with this sort of visualization is that you can quickly assess, okay, what sort of evidence do we have in support or against that particular theory, but also who are the people influencing the debate and what sort of background they have. And now we can see that a lot of those people influencing the debate don't have any expertise in the topic. On the other hand, we have come across a few evidence backed by scientific research that actually 5G emission is not a risk to health. So me personally, it's not my job to decide one way or another. First of all, I'm not an expert in this field, but my job is to understand, okay, what's the state of the debate? Who is actually influencing this debate? Should we give them any credence? Is there any evidence to support this? And so far, at least for the 5G theory, there is not much there. And then there is one more thing that can be very interesting with reKnowledge, is because, as I said earlier, one of the 5G theory is that 5G is somehow reducing our immune system and thus helping the spread of the coronavirus. Now, this is an assumption we can very quickly test with reKnowledge. So if you remember earlier on, we had our graphic about the mitigation measures. Now, if we use this graphic as a proxy indicator for the spread of the virus and overlay information about which countries have rolled out 5G at scale, here we are, we can see that only 5 countries have implemented a full 5G rollout. And even though all 5 are affected by coronavirus, there are many, many more countries affected by coronavirus who don't have 5G. So here is a simple way of quickly rolling out an assumption, because the evidence we have is that there is no correlation. So this is so this was a brief overview of the sort of analytics a typical intelligence analyst will conduct with reKnowledge. Of course, the issue of building consolidated knowledge base is not limited to the intelligence industry. Journalists, market researchers, due diligence analysts, and students all face a similar issue. And to illustrate that, we will now turn our attention to something a bit lighter and away from all these pandemic things, and we look at our Game of Thrones case study. So I'm sure as enthusiast network grapher, you've all come across those sort of visualization of the hit series Game of Thrones. And this is a big favorite for any new data scientist or anybody wanting to experiment with network graph visualization and analysis. And typically, to create this sort of graph, we use some basic text analytics, such as term co-occurrence. By looking at co-occurrence of character in a given sentence, the analyst can create those sorts of links analysis. The thicker the connection and the closer the node indicate a strong relationship. Now, those visualizations are really nice to look at, but they don't tell us anything analytically meaningful. Indeed, co-occurrence doesn't help us understand the nature of the relationship. Are they friends or are they foe? Is the relationship one of a familial nature, or is based on political or economic interest? In addition, in Game of Thrones, I'm sure you know, relationships are very fluid. One day, 2 characters might be allied before becoming mortal enemies the next. So to produce an in-depth analysis, we need much more granular information. So we use reKnowledge to do just that. We started by defining what information we would want to collect. So using our ontological editors, we created a node for characters and added all the attributes we were interested in. And when we've done that, we went on, oh, that was a video, sorry. We went on to gather information online. So I spent a few hours on Wikipedia and all sorts of fun websites and gathered my information, organizing everything. So I can just skip through the video. And once I've done this, I can start asking some analytical question to my system. But before I do this, I need to warn everybody, there will be a few small spoiler alerts. So I did a similar presentation last week and I was told off by a few attendees because I didn't warn them. So if you haven't watched the Game of Thrones yet, you may want to turn away for the next few minutes. So we'll start. So we could start by asking a simple question such as, who has Arya Stark killed throughout the show? So here we use our advanced query builder. And now build the query and get the result. And of course, the whole advantage of reKnowledge is that you not only looping pause. How comes you keep working? This is ridiculous. Anyway, is that you can keep drilling on the information and find more information for each of those kill and understand, okay, did she commit the killing herself, or did she ask someone to do the killing for her? So this is a simple way of asking a bit more interesting question to the system. But of course, reKnowledge really comes into its own when we start layering the queries one on top of the other. So here, for instance, we can map all sorts of family clusters. So let me just bring this. So here, the family cluster is based on familial relationship. So whether they are children, offsprings of people, or whether they are married with someone. So those are the sort of relationship we can see at the moment on the screen. And so we can see that we have a few different clusters. Oops, let's just go back one here. So we have different clusters of family. We can see some clusters are connected through a few marriage, but we still have a few clusters all over the place. So now we go back to our advanced search, and we ask the system to overlay the analytical connections, such as who is opposed to who is allied with whom, and this sort of relationship. And when we start overlaying those relationships onto our canvas, our understanding of the whole interaction of those various families is changing and is getting more interesting, because first we can see more and more connection between the various clusters, and obviously we can start understanding exactly whether this connection is more positive or negative. Now, by no means have I been exhaustive in gathering all the information, so don't take what you see as the ultimate Game of Thrones knowledge base. Something much better can be done. But I think with reKnowledge is a great way of doing this. So there's still a few issues. So typically Game of Thrones, because it's operating in a fictional environment, things like temporal information don't really work. So we have to be a bit creative and use proxy data to specify these sort of things. So here typically we're looking at episode numbers and season numbers to give us an indication of where certain things are happening. But the whole idea is that once we gather all this information, we can start seeing how specific relationships are evolving over time. At that scale, we can see how the whole network has evolved throughout the series, and hopefully found some interesting insight that we might have missed because we were too focused into the narrative rather than looking at the whole thing from a bird's eye and starting understanding the various interaction. So this is, so that's pretty much it for me. I just wanted to finish with those couple of notes. First of all, that reKnowledge is very much about democratizing knowledge graph analytics by enabling anybody to define, populate, and analyze their own knowledge graph. And although we are still miles away from the long-term vision for reKnowledge, we believe this first installment of the platform already empowers researchers to effectively embrace the network graph and complex science paradigm. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm eager to hear all your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julien. We already have a couple of questions, but please take a few seconds, catch your breath. Yes, drink a bit. I will just say a few words about the organizational side, and then I think we can start with a question of John. So, of course, there will be a recording. We are currently recording the session, and we'll also put it on our YouTube channel and also post it on the event on meetup.com. So you have multiple possibilities to get notified of the recording. Julien also agreed that he would share the slides, and if you have any questions, we will also share the email address of Julien. Maybe you can say it directly. Then, if people want to directly reach out, they can do so.
Oh yeah, no, my email is julian@reknowledge.tech. So super simple. Perfect. And yeah, we're very happy to share all the material you've seen today. We're very happy to share it with you.
Perfect, great. All right, then we have a few questions. So I would say we start with one from John. So he says that it is a nice tool, and it appears that the data sources are coming from web-published articles in the first use case you described. Here's a couple of questions. So the first one is, how are you using ArangoDB for that, or for reKnowledge?
How do we use ArangoDB?
Yeah.
Right. So ArangoDB is our effectively all the knowledge base we're creating is based on ArangoDB. So effectively, we've created a sort of interface that allows you to customize your ontological framework, and that maps into Arango, and then all the data that is gathered either through the add-on or added manually is stored onto the Arango database. But if you want, my CTO and co-founder David Costa is also on the line, so he might give you a much more educated answer than me.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to chat. So yes, around how we're using ArangoDB. I assume that the question is what we're doing under the hood with it. So I'm going to compose the answer to the question as we go. So we're using it obviously as a data store, as a multimodal data store. The NoSQL capability for us is fantastic. All the elements that we can do with indexation, textual search, fuzzy searches, etc. We're leveraging all of that for part of the product that you have seen. Obviously, the graph traversals and graph navigations are crucial, and the ability to define those nodes, those relationships, and the attribute level filtering on the relationship that we need to traverse is absolutely key when you are doing this type of investigative tool. So I would say that for the most part, we're using Arango pretty much to the extent of what it is there for. We haven't yet hit this enterprise scalability that we're going to need for some of our potential customers that we're talking to, but we will be looking at those capabilities as soon as we get there. At the moment, we are running off the community edition, and one of the things that we love about it is the fact that it is not only multi-platform, that we can very easily go to the cloud and scale it there for enterprise grade or a much bigger deployment, as it will be the case. In terms of the information schemas, and schemas are built to create the knowledge graph. So the first thing that I will say is that at reKnowledge, we are, although we are targeting private intelligence, we are pretty much, from a platform point of view, domain agnostic. And what that means is that we are allowing people to define what they want to search, and the whole platform reacts proactively on what they can do, both from the elements of the web add-on, as it is on the filtering and the analytical workbench. What you have seen today is, as Julian mentioned, the first installment of our product line. We've got a lineup of much more interesting elements that cover a number of elements on knowledge management. But this is our first installment. And the reason why it is a little bit crippled is because the target audience that we're going for are people that currently have no tools, and their job is inherently manual because of the nature of the scattered data. So there is no aggregated data sources, which links a little bit to the question of where are we sourcing the data. This is what our first customers are doing. They are literally scouring the web with Word, Evernote, and Excel, and they're trying to consolidate that information and make sense of it. So the first thing that we're doing is optimizing that process greatly by providing them some level of automation and workflow. Schemas and models. As I said, they define it themselves, but obviously reKnowledge has an inherent schema, a mechanical schema that actually deals with everything underneath the surface. In reKnowledge, we've got built a time machine. We've got a lot of automated processes that deals with the curation of the data. How is the data linked at the moment? At the moment, it is a manual process, although we are leveraging the learnings from how users interact with web pages to start a certain level of automation in that area. Excellent question around the Inference Engines. That is coming next. That's in the pipeline, and we're currently working on that. But yes, to the last part of the question around the analyst making judgments, that, given the nature of the work and the industry that we are initially targeting, that is predominantly the case. So this is an industry, the intelligence industry is not planning to replace analysts anytime soon. So what we want to do is to empower them to make those judgments as data-driven as possible. And I hope that addresses a little bit of John's question. It was a questions bundled into one.
All right, great. So I think we have a couple of minutes more, so we can take 2 more questions. So the first question is if you're already using ArangoML.
Not quite yet.
Not yet, but it's very much in the pipeline. So for us, the ML game is going to be critical, because in order to make the work of the analyst more efficient in the long term, machine learning and artificial intelligence going to be critical. So we already talking a little bit with Jörg at Arango to see how we could potentially find ways of aligning the different development pathway. But yeah, this is definitely something high on our development agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and to complement on that, and I just realized that my camera was off, so apologies to everyone that's still on the. Oh, I cannot. Right, I cannot switch it on. So.
All right.
What's happening? Yeah.
Okay. One last question. So you showed a lot of graph visualizations. So the question is, which graph visualization library you're using?
Custom made.
Sorry?
It is custom made, John.
Oh.
So we are using, obviously, we're leveraging D3.js underneath, but a lot of the technology and the visualization that we have seen, it is homegrown.
All right. Great. So I don't see any more questions so far. So, but if any question pops up later on, you can either directly ping Julien at reKnowledge.tech, or you can also ping me. So my email address is a bit more complicated. So best is to just ping me on Slack. If you join the Slack community of ArangoDB, then you find me there at jan.arangodb. That's my username there. My email address, as I said, is a bit more complicated, but I'm happy to share. It's jan.stuecke@arangodb.com. So that's jan.stuecke@arangodb.com. Yeah, then to close it up, Julien, David, thank you so much for your time and sharing your project and sharing reKnowledge with us and what it is capable of. It's pretty exciting to see an actual knowledge graph in action. This is honestly the first time for me. Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting topic for a broad audience. I see knowledge graph projects popping up across the enterprise, across the intelligence community. But it was great to see really one in action and see how the reasoning about data actually looks like in the graph.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having us, Jan. And if I may, I just wanted to mention one more thing. What you've seen today is based on our beta version, and we are actively looking for beta tester before pushing the product out soon. So if anybody is interested to try it, reKnowledge, as a beta tester, they can always contact me and I'll set them up with an environment.
Yeah, that would be great. And I can only motivate everybody to contact Julien, do a beta test, and help the guys to get to the final GA version. All right.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks again, and all the best. Take care.